Did you, well, believe that they were involved?
Yes, totally.
And so when you made that 911 call, about how long after the ambulance left was that?
Time recollection, I don't know. It's not too long after they retreated to the other side of the street, I proceeded to call the police.
And prior to today, have you had an opportunity to listen to a recording of that 911 call?
Can you please repeat that question?
Prior to coming to court today, did we play for you a copy of that 911 call, a recording of it?
When I say yes or no, I cannot remember at this moment.
Okay. If you heard that today, would you be able to recognize it as the 911 call that you made?
That is correct.
We have now marked that as Exhibit 20, and Your Honor, we would ask that it...
So, this guy, sorry, I came in late on this. This guy, because he can't recall and he asks questions that be repeated a lot, that goes to credibility of the witness. If he can't remember what happened afterwards, why is his memory so clear and so accurate during the event? Now, some will say because it was traumatic and it made a better impression. Others will say this guy has an agenda.
He had his knee on the dude's neck the whole time, Officer 987. The man wouldn't stop breathing. He wasn't resisting arrest or nothing. He was already in handcuffs. They pretty much just took the dude. I don't even know if he's dead for sure, but he was not responsible when the ambulance just came and got him. And the officer that was just out here left, the one that actually just murdered the kid in front of everybody on 36th, 38th in Chicago.
Okay. Would you like to speak with the sergeant?
Yeah, like that was bogus what they just did to this man. He was unresponsive. He wasn't resisting arrest or any of it.
Okay, let me get you over to the desk.
Dispatchers don't take complaints. That's why she's referring to the sergeant.
We need to check the pulse.
Okay, 1 second. I have reached the city of Minneapolis to reach someone in our property crimes division.
Y'all murderers, bro. Y'all murderers. How you gonna kill yourself? I already know it. 2 more years. You gonna shoot yourself. Murderers, bro. Y'all niggas is murderers, bro. Minneapolis Third Precinct.
Hey, it's dispatch.
Yeah, man. So I want to speak to a supervisor. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he wants to speak with a supervisor relating to 320's cause. Cup food.
They can kill that man in front of the store. The post.
2833-46, May 25, 2020.
Is that then an accurate recording of the call you made?
That is correct.
And at the beginning, you referred to Officer 987. Where did you get that number from?
Honestly, it was just visually popped in my head.
Okay.
Like, I looked at his badge, and that's what I read on his badge.
And so whose badge, which officer were you referring to?
The officer sitting over there.
Okay. And was that also the officer that had his knee on George Floyd's neck?
That is correct.
And for the record, when your previous answer, you were pointing to the defendant, Mr. Chauvin?
That's correct.
Okay. And so the purpose in making, what was the purpose in making that 911 call at that time?
I just felt like that was the right thing to do. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what to do. But call.
I'm sorry, I cut you off.
But call.
And the response then was to transfer you to a sergeant, correct?
That is correct.
And then at some point the call, it sounds like you're talking to Officer Tao. Do you recall if you were actually talking to Officer Tao at that point?
That is correct. I was. Because I think at the moment, at the moment that I was making the call, he proceeded to like intimidate me and stick his camera in my face, his body cam. And
okay. And the call sort of ends abruptly. Did you hang up and terminate the call?
I'm not 100% sure, but I may have, because I felt threatened once our interaction happened in front of the store with me and Tao.
And then from there, after hanging
May have
up,
felt threatened. You don't know.
did you stick around for a while and talk to some other people there.
Yeah, I wanted to do my own investigation.
Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Mr. Nelson.
Okay. Man, this should be interesting. The defense should get on this guy. He's crying and wiping his tears. That's going to make every news station. Now, this attorney doesn't want to come off like a hard ass or like he doesn't like the guy or he's attacking him. So you got to play it kind of cool. So it doesn't seem as us against them and we hate you because you're testifying against my client.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Can I ask what you're looking at?
Just notes, that's all.
Okay. I'm going to ask that you put those to the side, okay?
Cool, thanks.
All right. Thank you for your patience yesterday. Thank you for being here this morning. I just have some follow-up questions for you, all right?
Yep,
You testified yesterday that you started wrestling in the 7th grade. Is that correct?
that is correct.
And over time, you were talking about how you learn how to control your body weight, right?
That is correct.
And one of the things that you kind of talked about was when early in your instruction in wrestling, you call it, I think, flow wrestling.
That's correct.
And as I understand that, and correct me if I'm wrong, flow wrestling is kind of learning how to kind of keep your center of balance, learning how to, sometimes it may feel you should use your arm when you should really use your leg. Kind of
that's
just
not a
learning how your
question,
body works, right?
That's
Yeah,
fine.
correct. Less resistance.
Less resistance. So sometimes less resistance is actually better in certain circumstances.
Repeat that.
Sure. I mean, if you're on the mat, right, and your instinct is to push your arm out to the side to try to use your body weight to roll, you may want to actually use your leg to roll the other way, right? Kind of like flow.
Kind of, but not really.
Okay, how would you describe just the flow of wrestling?
Flow is less. Flow is more, I'm flowing with you without using my strength. I'm flowing with you going 50, 60% of it. I'm flowing with you, letting you get into a half Nelson and you feel the half Nelson, you're in it, and now you're flowing, your partner's letting you flow off your back and get into a position where you get into a stand up, into escape. Flow is where my partner's letting me get in on a double and I'm letting him finish the double, and now I'm flowing into my offensive or my defensive position of getting away. So
Right.
it's different positioning.
Right, so you're learning how to use your body weight against the weight of the other person. You're learning how to just get in and out of moves, right?
Flowing.
Flowing, right. And that's something that you learned, at a young age in the sport of wrestling.
Correct.
And as you continued your wrestling career, you testified that you wrestled all the way through high school and then into college for a couple of years as well.
That's
right?
correct.
And you would agree that wrestling is a sport,
Wrestling's a lifestyle.
okay? There are rules, there are points, there are referees. So there's a sport to wrestling, right?
Correct.
And I understand as a wrestler, it's a lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
But to the kind of the casual observer, maybe it's just a sport, right?
Correct.
All right. But you're learning how to
explanation.
keep your center of gravity lower and grapple with people,
Correct.
right? And then you testified that after you kind of got out of college or finished your career in college, that you started moving more towards the mixed martial arts, right?
Correct.
And so you were training in jiu-jitsu, I believe you said?
That is correct.
All right. And again, jiu-jitsu is a form of martial arts, right?
Correct.
Lots of forms of martial arts, right?
Correct.
Judo, karate, Krav Maga. These are all various forms of martial arts that you have some general familiarity with, right?
Correct.
But your training is specifically in jiu-jitsu, correct?
No. I'm a martial artist. I train jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, stick fighting. Like, I'm a martial artist. I don't just train jiu-jitsu. I
Okay.
train boxing, wrestling all is put into one. So as a fighter, you're not just working on the ground game. You're working on your stand-up. You're working, your Muay Thai, your kickboxing, things like that. That's what a martial artist is.
Okay. So you incorporate several forms of martial arts into what you study.
That is correct.
All right. And again, the notion of a chokehold is very common within the martial arts community, right?
That is correct.
Submissions. And there are many forms, right?
Correct.
Like the triangle or the rear naked chokehold, all sorts of different types of chokeholds or submission holds that apply.
That is correct.
All right. And again, I understand that martial arts is a lifestyle, but there is a sport to it as well, right?
That competitive side too, yeah. Sports.
Right.
Correct.
And I'm just talking generally, I'm not talking about the MMA fighting yet, but just even as a martial artist, there are competitions with rules.
This isn't a sport for him, it's life or death. He has to take people into custody. That's where I think he's going to take this.
Or you compete in the or in the martial arts.
And he may not take it here, he may take it later.
That's correct. Well, yeah, that's correct. MMA has weight classes. Jiu-jitsu tournaments, there's open weights. So you win your weight division, you have a chance to wrestle in open division, which usually if I'm competing in just a tournament, I'll do it in the open division, which is open weight.
All right. So again, generally, like looking at your career as a wrestler, what weight did you wrestle at?
I wrestle anywhere from 106 to 141 in college.
Okay. And when you would competitively wrestle, you would wrestle with other people who were in that same weight class, right?
Correct.
Great question, because Mr. Floyd was 240 pounds, and Siobhan is only 140.
That's right.
That's correct for jiu-jitsu.
In jiu-jitsu, and so you, as a 141-pound guy, may wrestle or may grapple with someone who's 180 pounds.
Or 220, 210.
Right. Or 100.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, okay. But then about 10 years ago, you testified that you started with mixed martial arts.
Just repeat that, please.
I believe that you testified yesterday that about 10 years ago, you began training in mixed martial arts.
Correct, martial arts.
Yep.
Yeah, with like tennis.
MMA.
MMA, mixed martial arts. Yeah.
All right. And maybe I'm confused, like, of your progression? So you go from wrestling to boxing to mixed martial arts?
So I went from wrestling in college to training in a martial arts school.
He is very defensive for this guy. He's not remembering, and he's asking questions. You remember when a prosecutor, because they got to go over the testimony, he was much more confident, I know what you're doing. Now, he's very defensive, asking questions and doesn't want to do it. That loses credibility for a witness.
Train in a specific form of a martial art, right?
Correct. You have some that just do box. You have boxing gyms. You got jiu-jitsu gyms. You have Muay Thai gyms.
Or Krav Maga
or
whatever.
Yeah, whatever. Anything, stuff like that. You have different specialty of martial arts for different schools. But some schools, one of the schools I was at, the Academy under Greg Nelson, he taught a variety of martial arts. It was a martial arts school.
Okay. I'm understanding now that you went from the wrestling to the mixed martial arts. Right. And about 10 years ago, was it that you started competing in a mixed martial arts?
I started competing right away. I went from wrestling in college to being one of the top amateur fighters in the Midwest to finish, just growing as a martial artist. So I started, at a different gym before I got to the academy. I was a wrestler. I didn't know anything but wrestling, at the time. So I take people down and ground and pound. And then I switched to gyms and under Greg, and I learned more jiu-jitsu. I learned more kicking. I learned different elbows. I learned, different martial arts.
Witnesses like this, sometimes you got to be more direct and make your point, because you lose the jury if you just keep going back and forth and try to make your point through his answers, because he's not really answering directly, he's rambling.
MMA fight,
correct.
Right? All of those various methods of fighting are employed in those fights, right?
Correct.
So if I am a boxer and I'm in a boxing match, right? I can't kick you, for example.
No.
But if I'm in an MMA fight, I may punch you, I might kick you, I might choke you, short of biting, right?
Correct.
And the point of a mixed martial arts fight is to actually knock the person out, render him unconscious, right?
That is correct. Control the cage, things like that.
You referenced the cage match, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we kind of think about when we think about mixed martial arts fights.
You got cage fighting, which you see UFC, Bellator, LFA, all things like that, and then you have martial art tournaments where it's just strictly jiu-jitsu. You're in your gi, you have blue belts, black belts, white belts, purple belts. They all compete at a level. No striking, just all grappling. Then you have like the ones that are us in the cage.
See, he's almost giving this guy more credibility because the more he talks about everything makes everyone know that he really knows what he's talking about. I don't know if I'd go there.
Professional record, because you had an amateur career, and then you had a professional career, right?
Correct.
And you had 11 professional fights?
Possibly. I don't even know how many fights I technically had. So.
Yeah. Well, you know the internet exists, right?
Yeah.
You know your statistics are saved.
Yeah.
All right. And so if I say that your professional record was 5 wins, 6 losses in 11 fights, would you disagree with that?
I think I might be 66.
Okay.
I think I'm actually 66.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when
So a couple seconds ago, he didn't know, but then he corrected him when he only said 11. Credibility.
you fight in a weight class, right?
Correct.
All right. People who are similar in terms of their weight, they may be taller, they may be shorter, but they're in the same weight class.
Correct.
Right. Okay. And again,
Later, he's going to say, you heard testimony about the weight class, and my client was only 140 pounds, and it took 3 officers to control 240-pound George Floyd. That's where this is, what he's setting up for later.
conscious or unconscious, right?
That's correct.
That's a way of determining whether or not
That's if
fight
they're
is-
not moving. I mean, if they're not. That's if they're not moving. If they're not fighting and stuff like that. Yeah, the referee has to make sure that the person is conscious. So he might say keep moving. If they're not moving, he might check. And sometimes the opponent will know that person's out. So the opponent, if you look at the ref, like, look, he's out. Like he's out.
Right.
Things like that.
And sometimes you don't know that they're out, and that's why the ref comes and picks up the arm, right?
Most opponents know when they put their person out.
But it's possible, right? It's a yes or no question.
It's possible.
All right.
How about that?
He didn't want to answer that. So that goes to credibility. See, he doesn't want to help him. He's trying to resist helping.
Martial arts, you voluntarily submitted to being put into chokeholds, correct?
At practice.
At practice, right. And you also practiced these moves, right?
That's correct.
Rendering other people in practice unconscious.
That's
right?
correct.
And in your professional career, you were also, at times, have rendered people unconscious and been rendered unconscious yourself.
Correct.
Through one of these chokeholds.
And you didn't die.
Correct.
All right. Now, you described these chokeholds generally yesterday. These chokeholds, like you described an air choke and a blood choke.
Correct.
You remember your conversation about that yesterday?
Yes, correct.
All right. So when you use these forms of chokeholds, whether it's an air choke or a blood choke, they use those in various forms of martial arts, right? Like judo, Krav Maga. A chokehold is sort of across the board in terms of martial arts,
Correct.
with the exception of maybe the stick fighting, right?
Correct.
All right. And you testified that at your academy, you train with a lot of law enforcement officers, military people, and law enforcement from both state and federal levels, right?
That is correct.
And you said sometimes you don't even know that that's what they do, right?
That's correct, depending on what level.
And sometimes you get to know these guys because you're fighting with them, right?
Yeah.
You're training with them, and they tell you a little bit about their lives, right?
Sometimes, I mean, we just build a brotherhood of the gym. You know, some people interact outside with personal life. Some people just interact in the gyms, you know, and build a relationship. So I see you on an everyday basis. Like at work, I go in, I see you every day. I interact with you there. Then I'm going to interact with you outside of work, you know?
Right.
And then
Okay.
Since this guy likes to ramble, I would get him rambling about, have you ever been choked out, or have you ever choked out anybody that didn't know they were choked out, or what? And let him ramble about all his chokes and all his experience.
To train law enforcement in the use of force
No.
or the use of these chokeholds.
No.
And or any other police academy for that reason.
No, I witnessed my sensei, Greg Nelson.
I'm asking about you, sir. Have you ever officially been asked to train police officers specifically in the use of chokeholds?
No, just witnessed it.
Okay. Now, air chokes. You described air chokes yesterday. Air chokes are from the front, correct?
Correct.
And that's because what you're doing is you're actually cutting off the air
Correct.
to the trachea,
Correct.
right? So you can render someone unconscious by coming from the front of the neck and cutting off their airway, which renders them unconscious.
Make him describe what an
Repeat
air
that.
choke.
Sure. An air choke is a front choke, agreed?
Yeah.
And what you're doing in an air choke is you're cutting off the air supply or the oxygen supply from the front of the neck, correct?
Correct.
And in doing so, you can render a person unconscious, correct?
On an air choke, I'm not a medical person, so I won't answer that.
Okay.
Have you ever
On a
rendered
blood
somebody-
choke, right? What you're doing is you're cutting off, and you described yesterday, the blood supply to the brain, right?
Okay. Side choke. Correct.
A side choke. And you described several different types of chokeholds, like the reverse or the rear naked chokehold, I think it's called, or the triangle. What you're doing is you're actually cutting off the blood supply to both sides of the neck in those.
Repeat that.
When you do a blood choke, what you're trained on generally is to limit the blood supply to both sides of the neck.
No, a blood choke is attack one side of the neck.
It's just one side of the neck. Okay?
The blood choke is attack the side of a neck. So my choke's from here, side of the neck.
Right, but you're using your weight and you're actually cutting off both sides. You're using your body and your arm, right? And you're actually protecting the trachea or the airway in the crux of your.
You're mixing chokes, so you're mixing your air chokes and your blood chokes together. Air choke is to attack the trachea. A side choke is to attack the side of the neck.
So if I have someone in a chokehold, right, and a blood chokehold using my arm, I may have my hand behind that person, right? No?
It's not. I'm attacking the side of the neck, not the trachea. You're attacking the trachea. I'm attacking the side choke.
I'm saying that the trachea is protected by the crux of the elbow. And so you're using the forearm and the bicep to cut off both sides of the blood.
Correct. From here to here. Right.
The attorney is explaining a carotid restraint, which officers are taught. We're never taught to attack the airway.
What does that usually take in your experience to render someone unconscious?
You go unconscious on a blood choke within seconds. Some people don't even know that they're about to go unconscious.
Right. You were interviewed by the FBI, right?
That is correct.
Right. I believe it was Agent Garvey of the FBI, right? Are you looking at some notes to refresh your recollection?
I have it in front of me. That's correct.
Would that help? Would that help you refresh your recollection?
I mean, yeah, that's why I was just opening it up.
Yeah.
That's correct.
It's kind of weird. We have rules in court. You have to testify from your memory, not your notes. But if you
It's
need
not
to,
notes. I'm just the name is on the front of the page.
what I'm saying is, if you need to refer to your whatever it is you have in front of you to help you refresh your recollection, we need to get permission from the court to do that.
Correct.
It's a weird procedure that we
I
have
don't
to
know his name, so I looked to see what his name was.
Okay.
Correct.
Would it help you remember his or her name if you looked at your paper in front of you?
That's correct because it's in the paper. Same paper.
Your Honor, may he refer his notes?
And Mr. Williams, refer to your notes silently,
Correct.
and once it's refreshed your memory, then close the notes back up and testify
Correct.
from your memory.
Yeah, definitely.
Mr. Nelson.
Okay, so what he was explaining, a carotid restraint is you squeeze between your arm and your bicep the two carotid arteries and you cut off blood supply. He's calling it a blood choke.
Two agents are right. One was from the BCA named Angela Garvey,
That one's correct.
and then Eckert is the last name.
So he's not supposed to be looking while he's testifying. He's supposed to look and then testify, and they're letting him get away with this.
That's correct.
Okay. And you were interviewed by those agents on May the 29th of last year, correct?
Correct, I believe so.
All right. You wouldn't do, and, you know, we have a transcript of that statement and the reports about it.
Yeah.
Would you dispute me if I told you it was May 29th?
I don't recollect the dates.
Okay, fair enough. And do you recall them asking you about blood chokes and how long it takes to choke someone out?
Correct.
And you told them 3 to 5 seconds.
Correct, just like I just told you, within seconds.
Right. And an MMA round is 3 minutes, right?
No, that's for amateurs. MMA round is 5-minute rounds.
Okay.
3 minutes for amateurs, 5 minutes for pros.
All right. So 3 to 5 minutes are per round of an MMA fight.
Of an MMA fighter.
Right. Okay. Have you ever, whether it be in your training after you have rendered someone unconscious, where they come back to and they start fighting again?
Inside of a fight? Have I choked someone out and they came back to? No.
Okay.
Like, finished fighting, the referee will...
Have you seen that happen in practice?
Rephrase it, or
So
please
some-
repeat the
so-
question.
I will do so. Well, you rendered someone unconscious, right? You're fighting with them, they've gone unconscious, you've released your chokehold from them. Have you ever experienced someone coming back and starting to fight you again right away?
Yeah, personally, no. Have I seen it? Yes.
Okay, fair enough. So you've seen after someone is unconscious, they come back.
That's a great point. He's going to later tell a jury. Remember the guy testified that was the expert? He said people come back when they pass out, so you got to be careful and you shouldn't let go.
And they continue to try to fight, and the referee has to explain to them that they've been unconscious. I've been knocked out, and I had to come back conscious, and the first thing I wanted to do was continue to fight. And then when I was in the locker room, they told me that the fight was already over, so I have no recollections of what happened in that moment.
Okay, great. Now, you testified that one of the things that you do and have done in your career is to work as a security guard, right?
That is correct.
And you've worked as a security guard in a variety of contexts, right?
That's correct.
So you've done some personal security for people,
Correct.
and you've done some like kind of doorman stuff, right?
That's correct.
Bouncing, I guess, is what you would
Correct.
call it. And you said that you have worked alongside the Minneapolis Police Department in those club type situations with off-duty officers and on-duty officers.
That is correct.
Okay. In that capacity, have you ever had to deal with a crowd of people?
That is correct.
Have you ever had to deal with a crowd of people that was upset?
Definitely.
Is it easier or harder to deal with a crowd that is upset?
Each person is different. Me, I'm able to deal with the high capacity of distractions, different
This guy has a pretty high opinion of himself.
on what's going on in front of me.
Okay. And have you ever been involved in a situation where there's a crowd that's upset and you were afraid of them?
Correct.
I'd like to direct your attention to the incident on May 25th of 2020 that you've testified about. You were shown an exhibit yesterday that shows that you arrived at the Cup Foods on the 38th Street side of Cup Foods at 8:23 and 12 seconds.
Don't recollect the time, sir.
Okay. Would you like me to show you that exhibit, or would you agree that that's probably correct? I can show you the
Yes,
exhibit.
sure. Is it?
All right.
See, these are questions that you kind of ask that you don't get much out of. The lawyer just said it, and now we have to get in this big thing about proving a time, which may or may not be the point. If it turns out being a point, he's proven he's wrong, well, then it's worth his time. But if this is just kind of like, yeah, you showed up on the east side, right? Yeah. Was it about 8:23? I don't remember. Okay, move on. I don't need an answer to that. For some reason, this attorney wants an answer to the time.
I am showing you Exhibit 18.
That's nice,
Yeah,
the way
you
they
can
can
see
pop
that?
up exhibits
Yeah,
in front of you.
This was already admitted into evidence yesterday. You would agree that Exhibit 18 shows you walking along 38th Street on May 25th, 2020 at 8:23 and 12 seconds.
Correct.
Okay. So, I'm not trying to trick you, all right?
That's fine.
All right. And it's fair to say that prior to your arrival there, you had no idea what had been going on in the area.
No, not at all. Like I said, I just seen squad cars. And
Good question. He didn't see all the resistance and fighting, and he's making all these determinations and conclusions.
Sort of pulled you towards that incident, right?
yeah, that's totally correct.
So you would have absolutely no idea that an ambulance was called 3 minutes before you arrived.
Whoa,
Don't know anything about that.
whoa, nice.
You would have had no idea that an ambulance was stepped up to code 3, which means get here quick, 2 minutes before you arrived.
Whoa,
No recollections of any of that.
You weren't there, you wouldn't possibly know, right?
Wouldn't know at all.
nice. Nice.
You testified that kind of based on your experience as a security guard, your first inclination is to just sort of observe everything that's going on, right?
Totally correct.
And that's what you did.
That's why I felt like I did correct.
So it's fair to say that you had not observed any prior contact between the Minneapolis Police Department and Mr. Floyd.
Only what I seen.
You would have no idea that they had been dealing with him for 15 minutes prior to your arrival.
Objection, Your Honor.
Not mine.
No, right?
He can still answer that question?
You can still answer it.
Oh,
If you'd like me to state it again.
repeat that question.
Sure. You were not aware that the police had been dealing with Mr. Floyd for 15 minutes prior to your arrival.
Not at all.
Nice. Good points.
Now, you testified that as you were observing Mr. Floyd on the ground, you observed blood coming from his nose or mouth area, right?
Correct. And someone actually stated that if you watch the video.
Right. I've watched the video.
Yeah.
But you would not have been aware that 3 minutes prior to your arrival, an ambulance was called specifically because he was bleeding from the mouth.
That had nothing to do with me, sir.
This
And
guy's
you made certain assumptions.
What was your answer again?
I didn't have nothing, recollections of that, nothing to do with me.
Just
Sometimes the court reporter can't hear, so
Yeah.
that's the only reason for this.
No, definitely. Your Honor, appreciate you, man.
Okay.
Notice how his attitude to your
Thank you.
honor is very different than this guy. He is very apprehensive and argumentative. I would almost
But
declare him
you
as a
yesterday
Hollywood-
testified that you assumed that the blood coming from Mr. Floyd's nose and mouth area was from his face being pushed into the cement.
I didn't say that. I don't. Can you?
There's no question.
Yeah.
You answered my question.
Right. His blood coming through his nose. I said blood's coming through his nose. I didn't say how I got there or where.
I'm going
it
to
came from.
ask you. That's non-responsive objection. You've answered my question, sir.
all right. Stop.
Objection is sustained. Jury disregard the last remark that was not in response to a question. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. You testified that after the ambulance came, you saw 2 additional officers, right?
Correct.
And you, prior to that happening, had no idea that those 2 officers were back there, right?
Correct.
He didn't know it was
So
taking
it's
three
fair to
people in the home.
assume that you did not hear any of the conversations between the officers, correct?
Tower didn't let me get close enough. Correct.
Right. The question is, did you hear any of the conversations between the officers? Yes or no?
Please repeat that because you said it different the first time.
Sure. Did you hear any of the conversation occurring between the three officers with Mr. Floyd? Yes or no?
No.
So he's getting a little bit more authority because this guy keeps rambling.
It's
He's
fair
trying-
to say that as you were there, you grew angrier.
Correct. That's what you perceive.
Pardon?
Is that what you took from the video? Correct.
As you were there and interacting with Officer Tao and Officer Chauvin, you grew more and more upset. Would you agree with that?
Correct.
You grew angry, right?
I grew control and professionalism.
Okay.
What the?
Again, you made a statement to Agents Garvey and Eckert.
He doesn't want to answer the questions honestly. He's losing credibility as this guy talks. But
And in that statement, you said,
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this form of cross-examination.
Overruled.
Your Honor.
Overruled. Proceed.
Proceed.
in that statement,
why did they cut this off?
you said that.
Yeah, I did. That's what I felt.
Oh,
You were angry.
No, you can't paint me out as angry. I was in a position where I had to be controlled, of control professionalism. I wasn't angry because I stayed
You
on the
object
curb.
as non-responsive.
Well, I'm objecting.
Overruled. Overruled.
Answer will stand.
Next question.
Thank you. You started calling them names. Yes?
You heard that? Yeah, you heard the
Right?
video.
You called him a tough guy, right?
You watched the video.
You call him a real man, right?
You watched the video.
you watch the video. Argumentative. Make him hostile.
You do have to answer the question yes or no based on what he's asking.
I'm going to ask you that again, so your answers should be yes or no, okay?
Yes,
You called him a tough guy.
I did.
You called him a real man.
I did.
You called him such a man.
I did.
You called him bogus.
I did.
You called him a bum at least 13 times.
Wow.
That's what you counted in the video?
That's what I counted.
And that's what you got, 13.
And that was early on, right? Those terms grew more and more angry. Would you agree with that?
They grew more and more pleading for life.
All right. After you called him a...
Oh, they're cutting out what he called him.
Did you say that?
Is that what you heard?
I'm asking you, sir.
I'm pretty
Did
sure
you
I
say
did.
that?
You heard that. I'm pretty sure you.
Oh, make him a hostile witness. I'm not cutting this out. They're
The
blocking.
video recorded, so I did.
You called him a bitch.
If that's a video you heard from the video,
It's
that's
a
what I
yes or
did.
no, sir.
If that's what was heard on the video, yes, I did.
And at one point, you said that Officer Tao pushed you.
That's correct. He didn't. He put his hand in my chest, is what I said.
And you observed Officer Tao push someone else, right? Or feel like he pushed someone else.
I didn't let him touch anyone else.
Do you recall saying, "I dare you to touch me like..."
Why are they cutting this out? I mean, this is just
Again,
ridiculous.
sir, it's fair to say that you grew angrier and angrier.
No, I grew professional and professional, and I stayed in my body. You can't pay me out to be angry.
You were not standing, you were walking around, right?
Correct. Control.
Notice the body
And at
language. He's
times,
getting more defensive.
You would go forward towards where Officer Chauvin was, right?
Correct.
And at times you'd walk to the side, correct?
Well, I didn't really get too close to Officer Chauvin, actually. Tao did not allow me to get all close to Officer Chauvin.
You
So,
attempted to walk closer
I stepped off the curb and I stepped back on the curb.
because Officer Tao didn't permit you to go forward.
He said, step back on the curb.
Your voice, right? You weren't just saying you're a bum. Would you agree with that?
You said I wasn't just saying.
Right.
He was
The
a bum.
tone of your voice.
Tone of my voice was loud so people could hear me,
And it grew louder and louder.
so I could be heard.
I'd ask so you could be heard over the crowd
And
and other people
after
yelling.
Mr. Floyd was taken by the ambulance, you continued to interact with Officer Tao as well as other people on the scene, correct?
That's correct. After they retreated, I know they had to retreat. I said what I said. I know they can say more to me.
And you continued to yell these types of things after Mr. Floyd was gone, right?
Me and Mr. Tao had words back and forth. Correct.
And I think you said something about hoping he would shoot himself.
No, I didn't say I hope he's going to shoot himself. I said within the next 2 years, you will shoot yourself in your head for what you did. I didn't say hope. I don't hope death on anyone. The Bible doesn't allow that.
So again, you continued to engage with these officers, right?
Tao,
And your voice was loud, right?
and he tried to intimidate me. So
They're going to
The
show Tao's
officers-
body cam.
Most of the officers were on the other side of 38th Street.
me and Tao was standing in front of each other.
At one point, Officer Tao goes across the street as well, right?
They both had to retreat. Correct.
And you continued to yell these same types of things.
Probably would. Correct. Yeah.
But you weren't
Wasn't getting
angry.
hurt.
And it was over and over and over and over again, right?
Because I wasn't being hurt.
It's a yes or no question, sir. Was it over and over and over again?
Yes, because I wasn't being hurt.
Thank you, sir. I have no further questions.
Any redirect?
Yes, sir.
Oh yeah, there's going to be redirect. Now he's got to undo this angry and make the jury see him as a friendly, caring guy now. Maybe get him to cry and talk about George Floyd dying, how he felt.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. I have a few more questions for you.
Yes, sir.
In MMA fighting, do you ever have a
Look at his smiling attitude.
situation where your opponent is handcuffed behind the back?
Never.
Do you ever have a situation in MMA where
Good point.
there are 3 people fighting against 1?
Oh, good point.
Never.
And when you were on the scene at 38th and Chicago on May 25th of last year, when you were watching this interaction between these 4 Minneapolis police officers and Mr. Floyd, were you watching a cage match at the time?
Well, I only seen 2 of them, the animals. So I was watching.
This is Dave.
And
Sorry about what you said.
That's okay.
Okay.
so you weren't watching a sport that day, were you?
Not at all.
Mr. Nelson asked you a couple times about this kind of blood choke around the throat. Are you, based on your training, your experience doing this yourself, can you apply a blood choke to one side of the neck?
Correct.
And is that done in mixed martial arts?
That is done. Correct.
He just cleared it up because a blood choke says both sides, but he's saying you can do one side. He's trying to get back his credibility.
And when you were on the street there at 38th and Chicago on May 25th of last year, watching Mr. Chauvin and Mr. Floyd, Was it that kind of blood choke you thought you were seeing on one side of the neck?
That is correct.
Or
You might have objected to ask her.
Mr. Nelson asked you about seeing times when somebody has been unconscious in a mixed martial arts fight and come to and try to wrestle again or fight again. When an opponent is rendered unconscious through something like a chokehold in a mixed martial arts fight,
The match is stopped.
is the fight stopped?
Right away, immediately, medical attention, right away.
Mr. Nelson asked you about dealing with crowds that are upset in your experience as a security guard. When you're dealing with a crowd that is upset, are there ways to try and de-escalate the situation without using force?
That is correct.
Like what kinds of things can you do?
Really staying calm, being humane, talking to the person, trying to talk them down, just getting the person away from the situation, just being humane with the person. What worked for me in downtown Minneapolis as a security guard and with drunk people that I'm babysitting pretty much. Like I have to come to and try to figure out a way how to solve this problem without putting physical force to them unless they are trying to physically enforce on me.
So while you were on the street there on 38th in Chicago on May 25th of last year and watching Mr. Chauvin hold Mr. Floyd down, did you see Officer Tao try to de-escalate that situation at all with the crowd?
Sustained.
Well, based on your training and experience as a security guard and your testimony just now about ways to de-escalate the situation, did you see Tao doing anything like that while you were there on that scene?
sustained. Sidebar.
Okay, so they're going to go to sidebar now. What this defense needs to come back with, and what he should come back with, the prosecution made a good point. Is there ever a match with three people? Is there ever, when he asks those questions, he needs to come back and go, when you're cage fighting, are there rules? Yes. Are you fighting for your life or you fear for your life? Is there weapons that your opponent could grab from you because you're required to have a weapon? That would be a great comeback to negate what the prosecution said about, have you ever seen three people fight? Doesn't the referee stop the fight when somebody goes unconscious? Yeah, this isn't a sport. And they're trying to make this guy an expert in a sport when he has no idea on what police are trained and what police are facing. This guy could have had a weapon. He could have retrieved one of their weapons. If they lose control, he could grab their weapon. He was larger than the officers. It took 3 officers who could not keep him in the car. He got out of the car. He was resisting. He was under the influence of a stimulant. I would also ask, have you ever fought a cage match? Do they do drug testing? Have you ever fought somebody under the influence of stimulus to where they can't feel pain, or a depressant to where your pain compliance didn't work because they were on drugs? He would answer no.
When you're dealing with a crowd as a security guard,
Overruled, he hasn't finished the question.
and you have, as Mr. Nelson described them, a crowd that's upset, would it help in your situation as a security guard to have other security guards present?
Yes, it does. More presence, the better.
Move on.
He already answered it. Shut him up. You can't rattle on and think of shit 10 minutes later. Attorneys hate to have objections against
During
such
your
things.
cross-examination, you were asked about the time that Officer Tao touched you, put his hand on your chest.
Correct.
And your reaction was what?
Immediately swiped his hand because I felt threatened, and then I stepped back and I put my hands forward, and I really was threatened by his presence. So again, I put my
made
hands
contact
up.
with him. You assaulted him, in other words.
And I proceeded to step back.
So,
I know you backed up to demonstrate, but if you could move back up.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Oh, no problem. I think we heard you, so you're fine.
just got to stay close to the microphone. So you didn't want Officer Tao touching you?
Not at all.
And other than pushing his hand away, you didn't touch him.
Not at all.
That's a
We
shocker.
kinda-
Somebody doesn't want the police touching them.
And then you went back up on the curb.
That's correct.
During your cross-examination, you used the term the officer's retreat.
Correct.
What did you mean by that retreat?
What I mean is I'm not a law enforcement or by any means, but I know I see when certain cases happen when it comes to certain things like this, most of the officers retreat away from the scene until all the right authorities come on scene to take care of everything. And that's what I noticed that they did. They retreated away from the scene to the other side of the street, and that's where they stayed until
He needs to get
whoever
crossed
came to deal
on.
with them.
Did they retreat because they were in fear of the crowd?
Also, during your cross-examination, Mr. Nelson asked you about things that happened before you got to the scene.
That's correct.
You weren't at all trying to tell the jury in your previous testimony that you knew things that occurred before you got there.
Nah, not at all. I was deer in the headlights.
But when you got there, for that time period after you arrived and saw Mr. Chauvin with his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck on the ground there, until the ambulance took him, you watched that entire time.
I watched.
He wasn't trying to get him to say that he testified. He was getting in there that you jumped to conclusions and made all these conclusions about the officers without knowledge. That's the point he was making for those questions.
No, at all.
Sustained.
Answer is stricken.
Did you see Mr. Floyd fighting back to the officers?
No.
Did you see whether Mr. Floyd lost consciousness while you were there watching?
Correct.
Your Honor,
Yeah. No argument on objections. I'll ask for sidebar if I want objection, or if I want argument. The objection is overruled. You may proceed. Ask the question again so Mr. Williams knows what it is.
while you were there watching, was there a time when you saw Mr. Floyd lose consciousness?
That is correct.
And how did you feel when you watched a man die in front of you?
We referred to Bitchute.
There he goes. He wants to elaborate.
You were asked multiple times about being angry
That's correct.
and more upset as time went on.
Correct.
You said you weren't.
So why? Why did you get angry and more upset as time went on?
He said he didn't.
Because again, they were not listening to anything that I was telling them.
He just
I
gave
felt like
conflicting
I had
testimony.
to speak out for Floyd because he was speaking.
On cross, he said he wasn't angry. He was professional and controlling. Now he just admitted he was.
No emotion, no nothing. Like I literally looked in his eyes.
Dude.
As I'm talking
What?
to him.
I mean, I'll just
Yeah.
stop you there.
We're
What?
going to stop the answer there. Next question.
What did you think was happening to Mr. Floyd?
He was under distress.
That answer will stand, but move on from that.
You felt he was in danger?
Correct.
In danger of what?
Counsel sidebar.
Okay, he's trying to get the guy to give his conclusions about facts that he didn't know what happened before, and he's leading him to get things in front of the juror that on how he felt, and how he felt didn't matter. It's what he saw. So, oh shit, I must have...
Continues to ask basically the same question after his...
I don't know what these guys are talking about. They're freaking idiots, whoever they got on court TV. I mean, some of the shit I was listening to them, I was like, dude, what the hell are you guys talking about? They're just making shit up on court TV trying to evaluate this instead of just, hey, look, again, I really don't have a dog in the fight. I don't care if he gets convicted or not. I think it's bullshit that we let all these other cops get away with stuff and now they're only convicting him because a black man died. That's my issue with this case. I got no beef or dog in this fight as far as, I just want equity. What's fair? If we're going to do it to one cop, then let's do it to all the cops and hold them all accountable. Let's not do it just to the cops because the person that was hurt was black. Meanwhile, cops are beating the shit out of white people, Asian people, and nobody's doing anything about it. That's my issue. So this witness is a horrible witness. He has lack of credibility, but unfortunately the jury is going to be like, oh, he was trying to help and he was so smart and he knew that Siobhan should have, and he's had no training, no law enforcement. He doesn't know the difference between a carotid restraint, he calls it a blood restraint, versus a chokehold, which is the airway, and he calls it an air choke. Cops are taught you have to protect the airway. You can't do anything to the airway. You can't obstruct it. Most places don't even want you doing what he's calling a blood choke, is called a carotid restraint, to where you block blood flow, blocking the carotid arteries, putting pressure on them, and it makes you pass out because oxygen from the brain stops and you pass out. And you can pass them out and I taught this technique, and I taught my guys how to use it. And some agency would say, I don't care if Gore taught you or not, you can't use it at our agency. But you can, at my agency, I taught it, I got it approved, it was an ROI, and our guys could have used it. A lot of guys didn't want to use it because they weren't proficient with it. And if you do it wrong, you can hurt the airway. And if you do it wrong and hurt the airway and kill the guy, you're going to be held liable. And then they're going to say, well, Rick taught us. No, I taught you to protect the airway and not to hurt the airway. If you hurt the airway and killed the guy, that's because you did the technique wrong. So a lot of guys would just refuse to use it. And then they would hide like little pansies with their pink panties and let the other cops get down and dirty and then come in after the guy was handcuffed and it was over. But I digress. So this sidebar is interesting. I mean, I wish we could hear sidebars, but they won't let you.
Mr. Frank.
So, Mr. Williams, why did you think it was so important that you were not being heard?
Because I felt like with the side choke, you lose consciousness, and I felt like he was in the process of losing consciousness, also from the condition of my fish in the bag.
So
Overruled.
You can continue.
So, like I said before earlier, he reminded me of my fish in the bag.
So let me ask it this way then.
The last no will be stricken about the fish in the
My
bag.
fish in my bag.
And so then, I'm sorry.
What the hell?
So you were concerned about Mr. Floyd losing his life?
Correct.
That's leading.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Good.
Any recross?
I hope you come back with a cross. Get on him, dude. Is there ever a fight where there's no referee and you can be killed? Are you ever afraid somebody's going to kill you when you're in a fight?
You were asked a series of questions on redirect about your experience in mixed martial arts, if you recall.
Correct.
Can you tell me about any of the conversations that you had as you were being rendered unconscious in any of your fights?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. You're stating.
What did you just ask me? What did you just
No,
ask me?
just wait. Let me rule on the objection first. The objection is overruled. You may answer if you have a recollection as to any time. Ask the question again, but don't answer until I say so.
When you were engaged in mixed martial arts, in your fights, in your competitive fights, can you tell me, were you able to have a conversation with your opponent as you were being rendered unconscious? Yes or no?
We're going to talk to each other, so no.
Nothing further.
Oh, he missed it. Should have went in with the gun and losing your life and no referee. That would have been a great recross.
You said earlier you're not a medical doctor.
Oh, he's going to ask him again.
If Mr. Nelson is asking you whether a person can...
Objection, Your Honor.
You can't say what he was asking him.
Stop. You're not allowed to give a medical opinion. Mr. Frank is going to ask you about your personal experience. If you have such a personal experience, you can talk about your personal experience. Nothing more. Mr. Frank, please phrase it in terms of his personal experience, not an opinion.
I will, Your Honor. In a mixed martial arts fight, when you are being rendered unconscious in a chokehold, you tap out, correct?
Correct.
And that's to prevent it from going too far.
Correct, losing consciousness.
And the tap out is the communication you use to your opponent to say, hey, let up.
That is correct.
And your opponent has to follow that communication.
That is correct.
That's the rules of the fight.
That's the rule of the fight.
And so when you tap out, They know it's done, and it stops.
Correct. And only time you go verbally.
Oh, shut up.
That's an answer to the question, right?
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
And further recross.
So now he can recross? No.
Well,
If he
you-
doesn't
yes, please,
recross,
thank you.
then they can't do a direct. Get rid of that worthless witness because he is freaking biased to no end. Did they excuse the witness and I missed it?
All right. Members of the jury, our next 4 witnesses are going to be persons who, because of their age, I am allowing them not to be on the video broadcast. Obviously, you will be able to see them in the courthouse. But just so you know what is going out beyond this courtroom, their video will not be shown. Further, when they give their name and spell their names for the record, that will be off the audio that is being broadcast outside this courtroom. Just so you know what the general public is seeing, you will of course see and hear everything. I'm also allowing, contrary to what is often in the rules of decorum that we operate under, that they can refer to other people who are at the scene by their first names, as opposed to Mr. or Ms. So that's with court permission. They're not violating anything by doing so. So with that, the state will be bringing in its next witness. There will be 4 in a row probably. We're not going to get to all of them before we take a break, probably 1 at most. Okay?
All right,
Thank
I'm
you.
going to restart this on another one.